Episode 5, A Different World, saw Marian and Larry get engaged, Gladys struggling to adjust to her new life, and cracks starting to form in the Russells' marriage. However, Episode 6, If You Want to Cook an Omelet, increases the tension on all sides as each character faces the consequences of their actions. Bertha sees the life she's thrust Gladys into, Peggy is forced to admit the truth about her past, and Oscar confronts the person who ruined him. The Gilded Age Season 3 is a fast-paced show, with plenty of drama already in the back half. Given that Bertha forced her daughter into marriage, it's safe to conclude that Gladys and Bertha's relationship has been difficult this season. However, in the most recent episode, Bertha ultimately supports Gladys. Following last week's tension between Gladys and Sarah, Bertha shows up to teach Gladys how to take charge of the household. Although Sarah is reluctant to resign, she finds her counterpart in Bertha. In addition to embarrassing Sarah over her decision to terminate Gladys' maid and bringing up politics with her over dinner, Bertha teaches Gladys how to handle her own problems. She advises Gladys to become indispensable, reminding her that only Hector has the power to force Sarah to go. Gladys accomplishes this by becoming involved with the estate, which is often managed by Sarah. Then, Gladys calls out Sarah's behavior publicly when her sister-in-law assumes the Duchess role and stands first after dinner. Bertha also interferes by calling Hector's attention to the issue, advising that he value Gladys and hire back Adelheid. By the time Bertha leaves England, not only is Hector more aware of the drama, but Gladys is empowered, leaving her in a better situation than she was before the visit. Given that Bertha forced her daughter into marriage, it's safe to conclude that Gladys and Bertha's relationship has been difficult this season. However, in the most recent episode, Bertha ultimately supports Gladys. Following last week's tension between Gladys and Sarah, Bertha shows up to teach Gladys how to take charge of the household. Although Sarah is reluctant to resign, she finds her counterpart in Bertha. In addition to embarrassing Sarah over her decision to terminate Gladys' maid and bringing up politics with her over dinner, Bertha teaches Gladys how to handle her own problems. Gladys is told to become indispensable, as only Hector has the power to force Sarah to go. By becoming involved with the estate, which Sarah typically manages, Gladys accomplishes this. Gladys then openly criticizes Sarah's actions after dinner when her sister-in-law steps up to take the Duchess' place. Additionally, Bertha steps in by drawing Hector's attention to the problem and suggesting that he value Gladys and rehire Adelheid. Not only is Hector more cognizant of the drama by the time Bertha departs England, but Gladys has gained confidence and is in a stronger position than she was before to the visit. However, that would be too tidy a conclusion. The main issue is that Clay, whom Sage recruited, has access to all of George's secrets from their previous relationship and tells the media about George's financial predicament. George's predicament worsens as his company's shares plummet and the Merricks back out of the agreement. However, George would rather see his business fail than allow the other man to succeed, therefore Sage's scheme to acquire the controlling share fails. Marian and Larry ultimately become engaged after a protracted courtship, but their joyous celebration is short-lived. Marian notices something is wrong when praising Jack because the footman simply forgets the name of the place where Larry took him to celebrate. Jack tries to hide Larry's deception, but Marian discovers that Larry was at a notorious mansion while interviewing Oscar. Marian decides she no longer wants to marry Larry after becoming upset by this news and the fact that he lied about it. She leaves a letter at his residence expressing her feelings, but he doesn't know what has transpired. Because Larry is in Morency for George and is unable to protect himself, the situation rapidly gets out of control. Larry succeeds there, though, as his research reveals that the mines are worth far more than his father initially believed. As she goes home from her interview, fearing the explanation she must give William following their run-in with T. Thomas Fortune at the train station, Peggy, like Marian, suffers romantically. However, following Marian's counsel, she tells William the truth about her relationship with Fortune and vows to stay away from him going forward. William is showing Peggy how much he cares by forgiving her. She makes an effort to tell him more, but William maintains that he is more interested in the future than in her history. William requests that his mother be invited to a suffrage meeting in New York after Peggy's interview persuaded Frances Ellen Watkins Harper to do so. However, he fails to inform Mrs. Kirkland of the purpose of the meeting, causing her to argue against women's suffrage during the event and clash with Peggy. William is then informed by Mrs. Kirkland that she does not believe Peggy has the time to be a wife. Peggy, meantime, bemoans Mrs. Kirkland's attitude to her own mother. Peggy does, however, admit her emotions for William, which heightens the difficulty of the barrier his mother stands for. Season 3 has seen chaos in the Van Ryn home due to Agnes and Ada's fight, Jack's success, and Ada's attempt to get in touch with her late husband. However, since Ada's narrative first came out, things have partly stabilized. Ada goes back to see Madame Dashkova in the most recent episode in the hopes of chatting with Luke, but she realizes something is wrong when Dashkova tells her that Luke is speaking to her in Italian. Ada realizes she has been duped and leaves when Dashkova calls her husband Luca, which was a misspelling of his name in the newspaper. Although it is a devastating blow to her feelings, Ada stops being controlled, which should pave the way for more positive plotlines in the future. Since he isn't prepared to quit his job, Jack is still keeping the money he made from the sale of the clock a secret. However, because of Mrs. Bauer's mistake, the information is already circulating. Agnes becomes determined to find out how much Jack received after learning that the clock was sold, and Armstrong makes it simple for her by griping that Jack's persistent presence makes fun of the other staff. Agnes wants Ada to release Jack after learning that he now possesses $300,000. Oscar's agreement that Jack should no longer serve as their footman persuades her to speak with him. Ada tells him it's time to find his place in the world, yet she still encourages his achievement. Thus, Jack bids the other staff farewell with tears in his eyes and vows to stay in contact. However, he leaves a note for everyone, giving Armstrong a present and kindly repaying those who helped pay his patent cost. Jack has moved on to his new life with this twist, but it's still unknown what that will entail for him. Oscar is resolved to confront Maud Beaton, the lady who defrauded him of the Van Ryn fortune, after she was reintroduced in the previous episode. He pays her a visit at the place where Larry found her and finds out how bleak her life has become. Maud discloses that her boyfriend, Crowther, took the money she stole from Oscar, leaving her jobless and compelled to labor at the Haymarket. Oscar becomes sympathetic to Maud after realizing how unfortunate her circumstances are. In a further indication of Oscar's development, he gives her $100 and buys her a train ticket so she can leave the city and stay with her sister. A cart runs over John Adams in a startling cliffhanger as the two are planning to continue regaining Oscar's business after John Adams later commends Oscar for his decision. It appears that even with his increased maturity, Oscar will still be subjected to abuse.